Marc Schiller,
Yes.
CEO of Bond Influence,
Yeah.
CEO and founder.
Yeah, I mean, CEO and founder, and now with Bond 360, the new initiative inside the agency for distribution.
When did that start?
Well, we announced it, I think it was in April, and then, it takes a while to get the films ready for public
Your first generation.
announcement. So we're just now starting to announce the films that we're putting under that Bond 360 banner, if you will, that label, the brand. So yeah, it's been a great couple months.
You're probably really excited to be a distributor.
You know what? I am excited. I'm excited to take on that challenge. I mean, I love working with distributors. I love working with people that have done this for a long time, and we continue to work with distributors who pick up films at festivals and bring us on board to help create the right marketing and PR strategies for them. And I don't want that to stop. I also knew that there were a lot of filmmakers that wanted to experiment and really wanted to look at it more entrepreneurially, and the traditional deals just didn't make sense. Not so much because the offers, I mean, you always hear, well, the offers are so low, I don't know what I should do. It's not so much that, really, because you could have a low offer and still have a fantastic team behind you. I think it's because a lot of people, are coming, they're watching their friends start making startups in San Francisco, and they're like, well, why shouldn't I think of my film as a startup? And I want to make sure that I'm adapting to that world, and that we're looking at creative people not as directors and producers and writers in these silos, but we're looking at them as entrepreneurs, because really more and more filmmakers are entrepreneurial.
I was just talking to Terrence Nance the other day, or an oversimplification of her beauty. You know this film?
Sure.
And he was sort of just talking about how, as a filmmaker now, he has to go through the entire cycle himself, because he's basically distributing the film. I mean, if he's not doing it DIY, he's participating in a very engaged way with the distributor.
Right.
So the cycle of a film is not a year or a year and a half. It's 3 years, it's 4 years, it's 5 years, because you're also now out there on not only are you in the festival, doing the festivals, that's always been the case, but now you're also doing theatrical. You're out traveling with your film. You're doing everything. And the upside, of course, is that you have more control, maybe, hopefully, over how your digital distribution looks and all the specifics of all that. But then again, in that time that you're now doing that, you could have made another film.
Well, not only that, a lot of times you're not getting paid for that additional work. So it's a little bit tricky. I mean, I saw that happening, right? So if you're not going to put up an advance of significant numbers, one of the things that you do say to a filmmaker is, we want you to be more involved. We'll have full transparency. We'll share with you things that you wouldn't really have. And that's kind of the quid pro quo for the lack of an advance, which for a lot of filmmakers, fantastic. They're involved in the way that their films are deployed. The downside of it is if it falls under a traditional split, a traditional deal, what that basically means is the filmmaker is now doing more work, spending less time making not just another movie, but making a living, working the same movie and not getting paid for it. And I think that's a challenge. I mean, when I do a P&A budget now,
Terrence works full time.
Well, that's terrific, because they have to. Because
I'm right.
But there's no black and whites. But what I try to do when we put together a P&A budget is I believe that out of the P&A budget there needs to be a payment for filmmakers.
Say what a P&A budget, what a P&A is.
Print and advertising. So the money that is being put up to release the movie. So what's paying for the physical costs of posters and Blu-rays and ads, if there's ads, and there's cost in anything. You can't do anything without cost. So the costs are prints and advertising, P&A. So what does it cost to make a movie hit the theaters? I believe that the future has got to be that the filmmaker gets a payment out of the P&A fund. It could be proportionate to what the P&A budget is. Obviously, you can't pay more to a filmmaker than what you have to release the movie. But I don't think the future is going to be where a filmmaker is going to go on the road for a movie, give up other things that they do to make money in their lives. They have families, and not get paid for marketing. I think they should get paid for marketing.
How radical is that idea?
Really radical? What are you talking about?
Yeah,
I
don't
mean,
know what you guys.
It's not just radical; it's It's heretic.
You're making enemies as you speak.
I hope not. I mean, I hope
no.
I'm speaking the truth before.
Right.
I mean, I never want to make enemies. I actually love, I love when I go to a movie and, Sony Classics or Magnolia or IFC or any of these guys really, when the system works really well. So I don't have I love those guys. I also think that if you try to put everybody in the same box, it's not going to work for everybody, and that's what I'm saying. So is it radical? It's extremely radical, but at least I'm the one who's saying it. I don't see anybody else saying it, but
if you're
needs to
in other
happen.
words, if you're going to ask a filmmaker to
give up
wear another hat, and give up, and also to wear another hat, and not just be a filmmaker, but in fact be
a marketer. A spokesperson. Typically, if a filmmaker is just going from film to film, they have a commitment to show up on the press days, to do some Q&As, to do, to make sure that they're available, and all of that is part of a contract. But if a filmmaker is being asked to be the one that's the gateway to audience, to give up their Facebook page that they've created 3 years ago when they started the movie, to give up their access to their Kickstarter community, to give up the connection that they have with their fans, they're giving up an incredible asset that in many instances took a lot of money and a lot of time and hours to do. I don't think they should be, quote, compensated for that because that's a transaction, but they should be incorporated into the approach that it takes to release a movie. Look, the people that are marketing a movie are employed. They're getting a paycheck every Friday, whether a movie does well or bombs. They're on a payroll. Filmmaker is not on a payroll. A filmmaker is giving their heart and soul to make a film successful, and there's a budget for that, and a filmmaker should be incorporated in the budget. It might be an honorarium type of budget. It's like it's not enough to pay for your salary, what you would make if you were doing something else. But it's a token. It's the beginnings of saying we respect the fact that you are going beyond the call of duty to support the success of this movie.
If you're marketing one film and then you're distributing also. So let's say you are
you being me at Bond or
I'm sorry, Bond specifically. You've tried to make an offer on the table for a film, and you're not they don't go with Bond, or they don't go with you as a distributor, Bond 360. But then you're potentially. I'm wondering if there's how you reconcile, if there's any conflict of interest at all.
Well, first of all, I just want to. I mean, my goal in life has always been, since I was 10 years old, to learn and get smarter and smarter about new things all the time. I love learning every day. I'm learning by doing this podcast with you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to always learn new things. You might tell me something and I'll write it down and I'll just remember it. So I'm constantly trying to learn and then use the learnings that I've developed. If those learnings are used for my own films, the Bond 360 projects, great. If they're going to be used for projects that are owned by a distributor that brings us on board, I'm equally as excited to do that. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that through having both, I can be more effective as a film marketer, strategist, and everything else. It's like, why am I also taking on clients that are outside of film? Why do I have retail clients? Why do I have companies like American Express? Like, most people are very siloed. Like, if they're marketing films, they're marketing films only. So for me, is that I can learn from GE and American Express and Kenneth Cole and
actually apply it to
even
filmmakers.
That's the point.
Right, yeah.
Is to take in new inputs. If I'm only doing movies, I'm just recycling the same knowledge. And to be honest with you, there's not always a lot of innovation in movies. It's not like we're learning from what we're seeing happen every Friday night with new movies going into the theaters. Right. We have to learn from industries that are as far away from film as possible to be able to make films successful, because our behaviors are changing. And theaters and others, it's a lot of work to adapt to that.
What did you study when you were in school?
Well, it's funny. I went to Northwestern specifically because of liberal arts. I did, and I ended up getting a degree in radio, television, film, but I actually took more political science and journalism classes than I did film. Although I worked it out where they very much wanted me to have a RTF degree. I don't even think that I ended up getting a degree in that, but I did not. That was not my focus.
I was wondering if, because political science is also very much based in philosophy, and I just kind of was thinking that was probably a turn-on for you.
I'm one of
There's
these people that want.
a Zen approach to
I remember meeting this guy when I was very young. I think I was like 14, and I overheard him. I did have the conversation with him, and he said something to me that I really respected, which most people would be at the time very much like, that's the opposite of what I would want to do. But his point, what he said is like, I'm the type of person that likes to be very wide and very shallow rather than very deep and very narrow. And I remembered that line, and I've always tried to live that. Like, I want to know a little bit about a lot rather than a lot about a little. Mm-hmm. And when you think about the world that we're currently in, we can adapt, we can learn a lot pretty quickly through the web, through experiences. Breadth of knowledge is much more important than depth of knowledge. I remember when I did my first screening, I booked a theater, and I started to think about that world. And I remember talking to a publicist at lunch one day, and I told her what I was doing, and I said that we were doing this film series, and I could see that she just looked at me, and she didn't register, and she said, "Why would you do that?" And I looked at her, and I thought, why wouldn't I do that? The amount of learnings that I can get from actually booking a theater, being on the hook for the box office that night, to be a better publicist was why I would do it. And I could just see that if it wasn't repeating what she was doing every week for years, there was no value. For me, there's a reservoir there to be untapped if you do it.
Well, I understand that firsthand. And no, you throw yourself.
It's like saying, why would somebody do a podcast?
Problems.
It's like, why would you do a podcast and interview guys like Marc Schiller?
On indie film.
On indie film. It's like, well, maybe I would talk to people, and learn a lot and ask them questions that I then can explore my own interests. Like,
why?
It's a gateway drug to
television. I actually wasn't saying
it's gateway.
It's a gateway. A gateway drug. It's engaging. For me, it's a turn on.
Every time I do an interview, I learn about so much because I hear my own refinement of what I do and what I say. I feed off of what you say to me. I mean, there's nothing that I do that's wasted. Mm-hmm. Like, I could Xerox a script and still feel that there's value in doing that. Maybe that's kind of my Buddhist Zen, training. But I've always felt that there's nothing that I taking the subway, I learn every day. So why would you not want to put yourself in more diverse experiences if you want to be smart in how you market and release movies?
Sure, but it's in your DNA though. You became a marketing and strategy guy because it turns you on. It's appealing to you. So the idea of a breadth of knowledge is appealing to you. But
I took it was really a challenge. So I never grew up. I have no. I mean, I get criticized sometimes because every once in a while I'll be very negative about marketing, and I'll be a marketer, and people will say, what is that message that you're sending to others? And I'm like, my message is that I see the positive and the negative about. Mm-hmm. Should we explain in the podcast that we're now eating some hummus?
Thank you.
No, what I was going to say is that I don't love marketing. I love creating a connection between a story and an audience. I love people getting excited about going to a movie or watching a TV show or reading a book. I love that.
There's a facilitating part of it.
Correct.
What I was getting at though was that for the guy though that takes the job at NASA, he's built a different way. He is the guy who goes deep and narrow and thank God we want him on that that job because that's where that helps. There's obviously different personality types.
Yeah, but movies are not. I mean, even I used to watch the Academy Awards, and I would watch these people that would make movies about good subjects, whether they were or important subjects, not good, important, cancer or AIDS or whatever, and they'd get up there to win the Academy Award, and they would act as if they cured cancer, or whether they were the ones that they made a movie. They made a movie that affected people.
Careful, I do want Tom Hanks on my show.
Well, you should. There's a big difference, and I don't have any illusions about what movies are. They can definitely change the world, but they're an introduction, hopefully, to subjects that you should then read a book on, or go read a TED lecture, or watch a TED lecture, or personally get involved in. I don't think movies are the being themselves. They're an introduction to going deeper on a subject, and that's what I love about it.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up pretty much in Los Angeles. Yeah, my father was a photographer for Life magazine when I was a kid, and
really,
yeah, it was a great way to grow up in the '60s. I was exposed to everything that happened, and I learned that you could be kind of, you're one. Well, I'd say now email away, because you can email anybody, and if you do it right, you can get a response from anybody in the world. But back then, I realized you were one letter away or a phone call away from being at the center of any story that was taking place around you. And it was a great way to grow up.
It was our internet at the time, for lack of another term. It was a unifying vehicles or
Absolutely.
what have you. That was where everybody looked
Absolutely.
at what was on Life magazine.
I learned a lot about media very early on. I mean, I learned the power of a photograph, the power of a great article, the power of acceptance of a diverse, set of opinions, and I've always pursued experiences and knowledge and let my work take me into places that challenge me. Is that going to make the podcast? That's Good Hummus?
It might.
We might have to explain that.
I wasn't sure, because when you mentioned you went to Northwestern, and then now you're in New York, it's like it's an interesting journey. Not to have returned back to L.A., for instance.
It's interesting that you say that. I mean, I've always felt my life is about that, is about learning and moving on.
Apparently.
To be able, L.A., West Coast, Chicago, Midwest. I loved Chicago. I loved the people there.
And I bet you related to
and
everybody.
now New York. Yeah, I relate to any. Relating people is all about acceptance. We're not talking about film, though. I'm worried that I'm kind of diverging into areas of
and we'll come back, I'm sure, to it.
I love subcultures. I love meeting new people. I'm accepting. I mean, I've always felt that if you're going to be effective in this world, you have to learn from everybody and anybody that's around you.
And talk a little bit about what's the origin story of Bond influence, and when did you?
Well, I founded the agency in '97 as Electric Artists, and it was interesting. Prior to that, let me go back and tell you my full story, and you can cut this out if it's totally boring. But I grew up in the film industry. I kind of, like I said, my father was a journalist, but he was also involved in film. And really, the only thing I wanted to do in my life was to be on set and work on interesting movies. And I did. I was very lucky to work with then Soviet filmmakers on films in Russia, and had amazing experiences. But as I started getting deeper into the film world, I just wasn't. It wasn't working for me from a lifestyle perspective. But the world was very different back then. I mean, I was at a studio, and I just wasn't challenged. I remember I had my Macintosh on my desk, and a lot of the old-time producers were kind of glaring at me, and it took me a while to realize that what they were threatened by was the fact that I had a computer on my desk and not an IBM electric typewriter. So I realized that was a sign that I needed to take a break. So
it's striking in a way, because one can't even
remember those days. I'm older. I can definitely remember those days.
No, it's not that so much as it's just it's more the remembering how that at a point where that might have been a threat, where something as just seemingly innocuous as that kind of the new technology.
And it was literally the shape of the Macintosh on the desk that was the threat, because the IBM electric typewriter was a very specific shape, and I had a very different shape. One was very long and not very high, and the Macintosh was very high and very, very skinny. It was very, very obvious, the difference. And I remember it took me like a couple weeks to realize, why are these producers, and by the way, they were Academy Award-winning producers, why were they walking by my desk and glaring at me? And I realized it was because of this computer on my desk. And so I said to myself, I've got to I've got to change the paradigm. And I was pretty young. I was just out of college. And I
changed the paradigm for
myself, changed
okay.
my own paradigm. Like I did not want to be that person. I did not want to be that producer who had 3 Oscars, on the bookshelf behind him his desk, but
that wasn't a
threatened
tradition you wanted to carry
I did not want to be the person that scoffed at a computer. So I left and I went up to Silicon Valley and I started to re-educate myself on technology and how it was going to impact the entertainment business. And at the time, it was amazing because technology had no impact on film, certainly. And when I went up to Silicon Valley and met, a lot of amazing people that were working for Paul Allen and Microsoft. And
this was in the late 80s, I'm going to guess.
Yeah, exactly.
90s, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. I could not have been better timing. And when I finished that, I wanted to apply what I learned. And I had a stroke of luck like I've never had before. I met these guys that were creating the House of Blues concept venues and places around the world, and I made my first mentor. I found my first mentor, not made him. I found him. Although maybe I made him. I needed
you don't make
him.
the person, but you make the
exactly.
do make the role.
So maybe I needed him
because not everybody is offering.
That's true.
To be your mentor.
That's true. He was not a mentor until I made him my mentor. So
right.
I think you're absolutely right. So I made him my mentor, Isaac Tigray, who created the Hard Rock Cafe when he was, I think, something like 19 years old or something.
That's disgusting.
And disgusting is right. And this guy just understood me and what I wanted to do. And he said, okay, go do it. And I started to integrate technology to open up new revenue streams at House of Blues. We were the first to sell tickets on the internet. We were the first to leverage community to sell out shows that were being added at the last minute to the club and needed help through digital outreach. We were the first to, broadcast a live concert from a venue ever on the internet. So we did all these first, and they were revenue generating. I mean, they were not just marketing gimmicks. This is money that's coming into the bottom line of this company. And I did that for a few years, and I then became very close to the business of how bands worked. And I understood touring, and I understood merchandise, and I understood how a band is a brand. I worked with the best, U2, Depeche Mode, all these bands. Mm-hmm. And we did a lot of early e-commerce on the internet. I did the first websites of 80% of the bands that are now, these established bands. And it was awesome, but it wasn't something that I'd figured out how to structure properly. So I transitioned it to another company and went on to do corporate consulting, and did very well working on projects for a lot of corporations. Mm-hmm. And then film just fell back into my lap. I found myself with an opportunity to create a marketing strategy for Exit Through the Gift Shop, a film that Banksy put together. And I'd already learned a lot of new models for social media marketing from other things, and just started to do it. And we had a lot of success with that film. Then we had a lot of success with evolving the strategies further on Senna. And Electric Artists kind of evolved into moving from the early days of music to film. But it's only now, today, literally today, that I believe that the models that we were using for musicians that made them millions of dollars, not kind of trying to make up for all the lost revenue from Napster, but literally millions of dollars in merchandise sales and in live events, in efficiencies of selling out concerts that would never have sold out if it were not for the internet. It's only today that I'm able to deploy that for filmmakers,
And you're patient because you've had it seems as though, to me, that you're approaching it with all the patience and the kind of there's this level of way you talk about it is like there's, they're kids. And right. We need to let them kind of go through their
maturity,
their clumsy adolescence before they become into, And
it's funny about that patience because I tell my staff the best way to approach this is you need to be patient and aggressive at the same time. And if you think about that line, it makes no sense. How can you be patient and aggressive at the same time? And the thing is, you need to be patient about certain things that are happening. Mm-hmm. And aggressive about others. And that's always how I've been. I've been patient about certain things that need of evolution. We need to have certain things happen, but I've been extremely aggressive about other things too.
Mm-hmm. So what was like a couple of the early projects that you you took on?
From the marketing side on Bond?
Yes, sorry.
Well, Exit was great. I mean, I had
you mentioned Exit.
Yeah, Exit through the gift shop. I liked that project a lot because I was aware of the film. I had been very involved with Banksy during the production side, and when it was decided that that the film was not going to be sold, and that instead John Sloss had always had this idea of distributing films under the PDA banner, which I thought was really unique and an interesting way to think about film distribution. I was fortunate and thrilled to work with John and Richard Abramowitz on releasing that film together, and then doing others following, Senna being another one.
Right.
And we were able to use, it was a war room that we created. It wasn't like siloed thinking where, the publicity call happened at noon, and then you would have a distribution call at 2, and there would be all of these different divisions. Everybody was at the table. Everybody was like, listen, we're all together. And that made the movie work. It's a great movie, so that was good,
Are you talking about Exit?
Exit, Senna, all of them. I mean, really. Keep going. But what made the work was the environment to do good work. If you have a good movie, the difference between it being successful and not, I really believe, is the environment that's created for the people around the movie to do their best work. Mm-hmm. And that's all I want. I just want to do my best work. That's my only goal.
That will service the movie, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm going to give my day, I can do it for a paycheck, but I really want to do it because I feel good at the end of the day. I go home saying, man, can you believe what we accomplished today? I mean, that's a motivation that I have. So I just want the environment to do my best work.
And so you go to the festivals and you just watch the movies?
Well, that was always a benefit of mine, right? Because most people that go to festivals are either a buyer or a seller, meaning you're either there because you're selling your movie, or you're there because you need to buy movies. And what happens at festivals is that people need to buy movies, so they're there with this pressure. Are they at the right screening? Are they watching the movies?
What aren't they watching?
What aren't they watching? For me, I'm going there neither, and that gives me the ability to pop into movies that are empty and see a movie that was like, wow, this movie is amazing, and fight for it because it was lost because it didn't fit what the buyers and sellers were focused on. Mm-hmm. That's a great opportunity, and I love having that benefit of not being a buyer or a seller.
So it's it goes back to an earlier point. You like somebody dumping a problem in your lap and then figuring out the solution, assuming, of course, that it's a good.
Well, let's take Senna. I mean, I had been tracking Senna. I mean, the same producer of Exit Through the Gift Shop had been developing Senna, and he knew that I was a Formula One fan, and I knew who Ayrton Senna was, and so I knew about that movie before it showed, and John Sloss was also involved, which was great. And when I went to that screening, a P&I screening, the Press and Industry screening at Sundance, it was empty. I mean, it wasn't completely empty. Well, because it was a Formula One film. Everybody wanted to see all of the other big movies. And it was, I wouldn't want to say empty. That's not true. It was not full. And it wasn't full because the movie wasn't amazing, because it's an amazing movie. It wasn't full because people typecast the movie. They said that this is a movie about Formula One. Why should I see that movie at Sundance when I can go see a movie starring Joe Gordon-Levitt or go see a movie starring, it's a movie that's underserved.
It's entirely told through archival footage.
Totally. And when I saw that movie, my wife came with me because I love when she travels with me, and she has a very specific opinion that I really respect. I looked at her into the movie, and a tear was going down her face. And I was holding back tears. And I then looked at another person who was in front of us 3 rows, because I could see her 3 rows down.
There's nobody, there are 2 rows in between.
Exactly. And she was at the edge of her seat. And this was a woman. And this is a movie about Formula One auto racing. And I literally I knew at that moment I had to run to go see John Sloss. And I needed to go see John immediately and say, John, please make this PDA number 2. Please trust me on this. And the conversation I had with John was not about how to make a Formula One movie successful. It was, how do we convey that this is a movie that that is about faith and religion, and that women would love the movie? How do we think about audience? Our job as a marketer is not to reinforce that this is a movie about Formula One. That's easy. You just do that with your blindfold. Our job as a marketer was to tell people that hate Formula One or think they hate it that they need to see this movie.
How do you do? So give me some concrete examples of types of things that you...
Lesson number 1, you curate your experiences. Like if you're going to do on your podcast, like lessons from the podcast from Marc Schiller, the biggest one is curate your experiences. And what I mean by that is never have a screening that is dominated by one affinity group, one group. So if we have a movie about autism, you immediately say, well, I'm going to show the movie to the Autism Society of California. And then you have people in the room that are all families with autism. And
I was at that screening.
You probably were. For many reasons, these types of screenings become the way that we market movies because they're cheap. And you know what? They're effective because you get a false positive. If you do a movie that says, I've worked for 3 years doing a movie about Formula One, you're going to get Formula One fans telling you that you are God because you made the movie that they wanted to see happen. To do screenings of only Formula One fans is a false positive. It's an echo chamber. So what I immediately did with Exit Through the Gift Shop was I curated every screening, so that the graffiti artist who was being, tracked by the law because they were doing things illegally was sitting next to a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, sitting next to the butcher who I invited because I go to buy my food on the corner, sitting next to the artist. And when you realize that in the room are all these different people, and if the film works, and Exit and Senna work, they're great movies, all of a sudden you have this explosion of excitement because everybody realized that they love the movie together, as opposed to seeing the movie in tribes where everybody is sectioned off. And that's how you make it successful, is you curate and you create it like a dinner party. You say, like, if we did a dinner party with all film directors, it could be a great dinner party. I'm not going to say that that's not an amazing dinner party. But you know what? It's a bunch of people that already kind of know each other. They're going to talk about things. A great dinner party is when a director sits next to a scientist, that sits next to a potter, that sits next to, a mathematician. And then all of a sudden the dinner is like awesome because you – by the way, can I swear on the podcast?
Yes, you can.
Okay, because I like swearing. So is it okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, you're not going to bleep it out or anything?
No,
like
I won't.
Okay.
No.
And Apple doesn't tell you no swearing.
No, they don't tell me, but then again, they wouldn't have to probably. So.
Okay. So I love a great dinner party, and a great dinner party is from diversity. Why can't a great screening be from diversity?
Right. But then what happens? So they go out and they tell their clients who they're, at the butcher's wrapping the...
Nothing. I mean, when you think about social media, it's like people said, oh, man, that social media strategy for Exit Through the Gift Shop was amazing. Like it was a social media strategy. It wasn't a social media strategy. Right. It was an experience strategy that was then amplified on social media. People that are like, oh, well, I am a social media agency and I update your Facebook page and I know how to do all this stuff. And there's all of these agencies that are being hired by distributors to do just social media. They don't know anything about screenings. They don't know anything about anything. But they do know how to make sure that your Facebook page has more likes and more engagement.
And that you're properly using the hashtag.
And you're properly using a hashtag. But, for me, that's just complete bullshit because social media is now very mobile. It's something that's on your phone. You're not going to your computer all the time. And what you're typically doing on social media is sharing your experience that's happening offline. You're sharing a photograph. So I create things that create photographs. You share the fact that you just walked out of something and loved it. The fact that you were treated well, the fact that there was wine after a screening and you got to meet the director and you got to ask your question, the goodwill that comes from trusting that you're able to treat people in ways that have respect. That's the best marketing campaign for a movie in the world. I remember maybe it still happens. Mm-hmm. I'd open Time Out magazine or Village Voice, and it would be big ad for a movie, and then it would say free passes to the Village Voice screening of some movie.
Yes.
And then they would go to these screenings, and they would say that these were word-of-mouth screenings. Giving somebody a free ticket to a movie starring Tom Hanks is pretty easy. Mm-hmm. That's not brain surgery. And so those people are just warm butts in a seat. They have no affinity to the movie. Getting people that don't want to see a Formula One movie to fall in love with a Formula One movie, that's marketing.
Or, as you said before, recognize that it is not really a Formula One movie.
But to them it is, because they don't know yet.
Right, before they walk in, then they realize it's a film about,
but the hard part is not
and
on a good movie. The hard part is not what they walk out
no, I
thinking.
get it.
It's what they walk in. Do they even walk in? There's a lot of great movies that don't make a dime in the box office, not because if they walked out of the movie they would love it, because they're never walking into the movie because the marketing is not inviting in a way that says you should walk into it. Mm-hmm. I'm the type of person that I want to go on a new journey every time I walk into a movie theater. I think there's a big mistake, and with some movies that aren't good or aren't great, I should say, I get the strategy. If a gay and lesbian movie plays only at gay and lesbian film festivals and is only being marketed to people that they think are their audience, gay and lesbian people, what does that say about the movie? For me, it says that the movie is pretty boring and limited, that it doesn't think that it can reach and engage me, a straight heterosexual man. Why can't a movie of any subject compel me to go pay $12 to see it? If a great movie is taking you on a journey that you didn't know you'd be fascinated on. So the idea that that people, that's why I love Buck and these movies that transcend their niches. People that saw Buck were not only people that love horses. So,
no problem.
I am doing a podcast, so your phone with me might be recorded. Everything good?
Mrs. Schiller.
I don't know if she'd like to be called Mrs. Schiller, but Sarah Schiller, yes.
Okay.
So what was I saying before my phone rang? I was saying that
Buck.
That movie worked not because horse people loved the movie, it's because everybody loved the movie.
Sure.
That's hard to do, dude. That's not easy to get somebody to go see a movie about a horse whisperer who doesn't love horses. But great marketing, great PR does that.
But who doesn't love a horse?
Enough to go see a movie about horses? Come on.
Yeah.
You're not going to go see a movie about everything you
Maybe
love.
they thought it was Uncle Buck. I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's a good movie, by the way. I like it.
It was a good movie. I understand exactly. Your point is taken. And
so you're saying let's move on to the next one because you made that point, and now we're
no. But what did crystallize as you were talking was that each film that you select, it's not just about the film; it's about the bigger picture. And so you're willing to take risks on certain films because you connect on some level, and because of your broader sort of approach and the philosophy about how you talk about films and get them out in the world.
I remember when we were doing Senna, we opened very well, and the movie was definitely working when we released the movie. And what I loved about working with John Sloss and Richard Abramowitz, John kind of being the quarterback of the project at PDA and with Cinetic, and Richard Abramowitz, who was kind of has been for many, many movies kind of my day-to-day partner. We were doing great. And I remember 4 weeks into the release of the movie, Richard called me and he said, "Listen, we got a problem. And by the way, the movie's doing really well in the box office." I'm like, "What's the problem, Richard? I think we're doing pretty good." And he's like, "We're not crossing over as much as we should be. We've got to cross over for this movie to work."
To non-sports.
Right. And the thing about any movie that is the movie that you're like, "I saw that movie," it's usually because it, quote, crosses over. We have to develop strategies to cross over from the very beginning. And the positioning of a movie has to be open to crossover. And I see so many great movies being limited by terrible positioning, like the poster that expects that I know. I hate a movie where it's a great story about somebody that a niche really knows, a great philosopher, thinking we need to market to everybody who knows the philosopher. So their whole ad campaign is to reinforce that this movie is perfect
when you
for
know
those that know it.
What you need to reach are everybody who doesn't know.
But what about everybody that doesn't know the philosopher?
Right,
Exactly.
Right. And so is that often why we'll see one poster early and then all of a sudden it's about to go into its theatrical and its distribution part of its trajectory, and then we see an all-new poster because these guys sort of are taking a different approach?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, I think that it's not about the filmmaker doing it mistakenly in the beginning. It's about the distributor getting scared and saying, well, look, right.
Often, early on you'll get the whatever production team will commission a poster for the festivals and for what have you.
Yeah.
Right? And then it changes potentially when
it changes a lot because you learn the movie that you have. I mean, I remember working with filmmakers. The festivals are pressuring them to kind of give all these marketing materials, and in some ways it makes sense because you should be thinking about your audience when you take a film to a festival. But the one that I hate is give us a trailer. So the filmmakers just finished their movie, and all of a sudden they know nothing about how to cut a trailer, and they're being pressured to cut a trailer, and they're giving trailers to festivals, and they've never even watched their movie with an audience. And I'm like, trust me, I've done this enough times to know that you do not know your movie until you watch it with an audience that is not your friends and family and cousins, because they laugh at places that you didn't expect. They cry. They ask you questions. You realize, man, that scene really works. And so any filmmaker that tries to cut a trailer before they're just about to be releasing a movie is making a big mistake. And sometimes they just label it the wrong thing. It's like, cut a teaser, cut a scene, like cut something, but don't call it a trailer. Like a trailer for me is what I see on Apple iTunes before I decide to go to a movie.
Right. That's a better example than the poster. You're right. The trailer is something you generally see. And that's why, as somebody who actually is on the other end of the whole, publicity end of the spectrum, where you be very careful about what trailer you use.
What about photographs? Forget even the trailer or the poster. Those have to be designed. The worst offender are stills. So if it's a documentary especially, but if it's a low-budget movie, you did not have a unit photographer on set taking beautiful photographs of your unknown actors,
right, and
been there on the set taking photography. So typically you have some, you've got some photographs. And then you go into the film and you pull screen grabs from the actual movie because that's the only way that you can have photography. So two mistakes happen way too often. Because the festivals are asking for so much material and you're rushing to finish your movie, you just give the photographs that you think are the best. You don't realize that those photographs are the ones that are going to be repeated over and over and over and over again.
Forever.
And forever because Google, because not only that, they're on Google search. And I've given news outlets, media outlets, new photography. And then I've looked at the article that they printed, and it's not the photograph that I gave them. It's the photograph that they saw come up the most on Google image search. Half the time it's because they didn't want to take my 3-megabyte file and reduce it down to 200K for the article, so they just pulled the 200K off of Google search, and that photograph is a disaster because it doesn't reflect the positioning of the movie. The worst offender is I do a movie about a guy, let's say I'm marketing a movie about a guy who is a farmer, and if you see the movie, you know that the guy's fascinating and he's a beautiful guy. So what you do is you pull a photograph that's basically a headshot of a farmer, and you give that as your marketing materials to every media outlet in the world, and it gets propagated. And they're like, why would I go see a movie about that dude, like some guy? If you've seen the movie, you know why you would do it. But if I'm reading the article in the New York Times, that photograph is going to tell me every reason why I shouldn't go see the movie because there's no drama in that photograph. And I see so many people use photography wrong where they think that they should be showing photographs of their characters and not marketing the movie through their photography. Two completely different things.
How do you know what's the right photograph?
So what I do is I watch the movie and I think, what is a photograph that is telling an
Or even
incomplete
emotional?
story.
Oh, okay.
No, it doesn't have to be emotional all the time. There's an incomplete story there. The drama of the photograph, that you have to learn more to understand what that photograph is. That's the photograph. Unless you have look, if your movie stars Matthew McConaughey and Tom Hanks and stars, you can put whatever photograph you want. It's Matthew McConaughey.
Right.
But if my movie stars an unknown actor or is a documentary about a subject that has not yet been mainstream, it's not Donald Rumsfeld. But even with Donald Rumsfeld, why do we need another picture of Donald Rumsfeld as your marketing for a movie? Where's the photograph that shows the drama of the movie? And I think when I see a photograph of a headshot of Donald Rumsfeld about a movie about Donald Rumsfeld, I don't want to go to that movie.
It's 75 minutes of just Donald Rumsfeld.
I don't. If that's their best shot at getting me to see a movie of a headshot of a guy, I don't want to see that movie. I want the shot that says, "What is that? What I need to know more about that." That's a poster. A poster for me is not a graphic design, contest. It's not who can make something look pretty or who can make something look beautifully designed. Today, it's pretty easy to get something designed pretty well. Mm-hmm. People are pretty adept to great design. What's hard is to see a poster and say, "What the fuck is that? I need to see that." That's different. That's marketing. Too many movies are just trying. If you've got stars, put the stars out front maybe. But for the movies that I work on, it's not about the stars. It's about why should I see this movie?
So Errol Morris, if you're listening.
No, it wasn't a criticism of Errol Morris.
No, it's not. No, I know.
It was a way that I think is look, Errol
And
Morris will do very well with his movies.
Right,
I'm not worried about that. I just use it as an example of what I think is lazy marketing or lazy PR, where we're just like, okay, give me 5 photographs and that's what I'll use. It's like, well, are those 5 photographs really telling you the best reason why I should see this movie?
Just keep an eye on the... Okay, 8 o'clock.
Got 10 minutes.
Very good.
How is this? Interesting? Or
yeah,
anything?
this is great. Are you kidding me? Did you try the pizza, the pesto pizza?
Not yet.
Here.
Are all of your podcasts over pizza and...
They are now.
They will be now.
This is great. I'm enjoying this thoroughly.
What else do you want to talk about?
Pine nuts.
It'd be funny in the podcast where by the end of it we're just chewing and we can't get a sentence out.
Yeah, I know.
And it'll just be completely unintelligible because we're eating and only you and I will enjoy it. Exactly.
What, I'm going to have to go on and try to find it. It seemed like there was a new initiative going on.
Well, we're now releasing movies digitally direct.
Right.
Which is amazing because I'm getting data and getting an understanding of what works and what doesn't based on sales numbers that I've never gotten before. Nobody gets before, and it's just blown my mind in terms of how I can be more effective in what I do by knowing what converts into a sale or not at the time that the sale happens. That for me is a game changer, is that I get an email every time one of my movies makes a sale. And somebody would say, well, why would you want those emails? Like, isn't that you're just getting spam? And it's like, no, I learn where the person is, how much they bought it for, I get literally an email every time there's a sale.
So whether they're going on Amazon or they're going
No. I'm sorry to no. I would love to get it from Amazon and others. Specifically on one movie, I'm doing a test, and we're releasing it exclusive. This is a movie called East Nashville Tonight, and we're doing so much innovation in this movie.
Very unusual.
You should see it. It's funny. It's crazy. It's made for next to nothing, and because of that, the filmmakers were really smart. They were like, listen, we made the movie for next to nothing. The musicians that are in the movie, we all had fun. Let's just experiment with the movie. We don't care if the movie ever does things the traditional way. We're not going to lose anything by, if we need to, give it away for free. And I don't want to give anything away for free. So we've been using it to experiment. And I've gone to Harvard on the last 3 weeks by learning through this great little movie called East Nashville Tonight.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you're getting an email, So it's directly through
The website of the
site
directly.
or
No.
director's site? Okay, got you. Okay,
No,
so
Bond
the
is never.
filmmaker.
So here, let's talk about that. So most people get information in lots of ways. I look at the numbers. Okay, I used to build very bloated websites and get paid money to build a film website that has 30 videos and has bios and have everything.
Join the team.
Join the team and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's fine, and I guess you make a little profit on the production that you make. But when you look at the Google Analytics, what are people doing? Trust me, they're not looking at 90% of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Why not? Because they get it all on Google. If there's a great article on Twitch or if there's a great podcast that you do about a movie, they're just seeing all of the stuff. They don't need to go to a website for it to be the ultimate destination on a movie. But it's usually the number one search result. So if you tell me, if I say to you tonight, hey, I just saw East Nashville tonight, it's really cool. You're going to write down the name. You're not, trust me, as much as people think you do, you're not going to open up your Netflix and search for it on Netflix. Most people do not do that. Some might, but most people don't.
No, they go to the URL.
You're not going to go to iTunes and suddenly put in the search, is this movie on iTunes? The easiest thing to do is to open your browser and put in the words East Nashville Tonight. So what happens when you do that on any movie? The website of the movie is going to come up first if there's a website. Second is usually either IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes, and then some articles. As much as I would want, naturally through search, the Netflix link to come up or the Amazon link to come up and not be an ad but be a natural search result, or iTunes, it doesn't. It doesn't. So now you go to a website. Mm-hmm. Try buying a movie on a website that movie came out theatrically a year ago. Do it tonight. Just do it as a test. Mm-hmm. If you're listening to the podcast, pick up a movie that you can remember, and trust me, I don't even know the name of it. I know what's going to happen. You're going to go to a website that probably has not been updated for a year and a half since the theatrical finished. You're going to go to the buy page. There's going to be 25 logos of every retailer that has the movie, even though 90% of it's on two. You're going to click on a couple of those logos of those retailers, and it's going to take you forever to figure out how to buy this movie. I don't believe that that's a sustainable future. I believe that the website is the retailer, that simplicity, and by the way, this is a new awakening for me. Mm-hmm. If you had asked me about this a year ago, I'd want you to give me $30,000 to build your website. Now I want you to give me none, because I think the website should be as few things as possible. It should be a trailer, a cast list, a Twitter feed, a link to Facebook, a couple photographs, and a big understanding of where you can buy the movie. That's it. Mm-hmm. That's evergreen to me. Mm-hmm. And the fact that people are not replacing their old websites with new ones, knowing that Google is the gateway to any discovery we have on the internet, is leaving a lot of money on the table. Mm-hmm. A lot of money on the table. Because we don't have the patience to figure out how to buy a movie anymore. Mm-hmm. And yes, everything's on iTunes, but you know what? Not everybody uses iTunes. I love iTunes, so I wish they would, but there's lots of ways to do things.
Right. Fascinating. Learned a lot.
Well, for me, it's not even learning anything new. It's just going back to what you already know. It's common sense.
Think about it just as a user.
Exactly.
It's really simple. It's like, what do you do? What's your behavior? What's your activity?
And tie it to the retail of the movie. That's the big difference. That's the big difference. I get a lot of data from ads online. Mm-hmm. If I do a banner ad that says buy the movie on iTunes, I get a lot of data about that ad. What I don't get is an understanding of how many people bought the movie, who those people are, what they do. I don't get the numbers until much later, and that's fine. iTunes is a great marketplace when it works. I'm not critical of iTunes, but I also want to make sure that we have an additional layer, which is all of that data. The benefit of doing like an event at a movie theater at like $20 is that I can sell the tickets directly. Like people say, why would you ever want to four-wall a movie theater? Well, the reason why you want to four-wall the movie theater is because then you get to know every single person that went to see the movie. Mm-hmm. You get their email addresses. You get the ability to a year later say, hey, I've got a new movie, and you bought my other one. Yeah. Not you read an ad or I don't know half the people, but when I get the ticket buyer's data, that's worth more than the ticket. Mm-hmm. And people don't know that yet. They're missing out, and that's why is Amazon about its products that it sells, or is it about its data about the customers who buy the products? It's about the data of the customers, and filmmakers need more data. How long can we, in the age of the internet, still have a filmmaker say, I have no idea. I went to a breakfast the other day. Filmmaker says, I've made 4 movies. Each one has done well over $1 million. I'm making my 5th movie. Little independent, And I sit here not knowing one person who has ever bought my movie. I know that they exist, but I don't have their email address. I don't know who they are. I can't do anything about it. That doesn't make any sense.
That filmmaker was on the show.
That filmmaker is every filmmaker.
Thank you so much, Mark.
I love it. I love talking about this stuff.